Hello, thank you for being here today. My name is Lynn Dome, Women in Cybersecurity Executive Director, and we're so excited to have you join us as we have Karen from the Home Depot here with the webinar, Deciphering Trust in a Zero Trust World. There couldn't be anything more relevant of a topic right now, so we thank you, Karen, for joining us. And I'm going to share my screen here and just give a little bit of an overview of the Wheesus organization. We are a 501c3 member-based nonprofit, and our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. Our community is comprised of women, allies, and advocates, and we have over 5,000 members having representation in over 70 countries with 38 professional affiliates and 130 student chapters. And so our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. And how we do so is by creating opportunities. So because we're a member-based organization, all our members are in an online member forum where they can network and connect with each other. We also have special interest groups where everyone could have their conversation on the topics that feel more relevant to them, like data privacy or cybersecurity law, or even neurodiversity in cybersecurity, or military spouses in cybersecurity. So we're all about cultivating a community within a community. We have many different skill development training programs, such as the Security Training Scholarship made possible by Google, Bloomberg, and Facebook. AWS builds out an entire roadmap for us. We offer Cyber Start games to our 130 student chapters, and plus many, many more skill development training programs. We have newsletters and webinar series. Our conference remains a very important initiative of ours. Our upcoming conference is September 8th through the 10th in Denver, Colorado. We were at full capacity within 3 hours of opening up registration. And we also offer many different scholarships, grants, and awards for that conference. We have speaking and media opportunities, so our members are being what others can see, and also building up their portfolios, their LinkedIn profiles, their resumes, and gaining new experiences because of the opportunities that the Wheesus organization offers. We have a cyber talent emergency fund where Wheesus members can receive up to $599 within 48 hours of a true financial emergency, such as they can't afford their rent, or their car broke down, or they have an unexpected medical expense. This is a way for those students to focus on their studies and not get derailed by these financial hardships and how it's impacting their lives. A job board plus where all our members can upload their profiles and their resumes and also get recruited from. All our strategic partners are in the job board, posting their jobs and recruiting daily from the job board. We participate in market research. We have a leadership summit. We have a veterans assistance program, a military spouse assistant program, a veterans apprenticeship program, a speakers bureau. In addition to that, we also have a mentor-mentee program, which applications are going to be opening up at the end of August. We launched that program in 2020, and we were so pleased to have 707 mentees and 185 mentors in the program. And we designed and developed a 12-month structured framework to upskill and up-level women no matter where they're at in their careers, preparing them for their next level of advancement. We also have a racial equity committee, and we provide leadership series to over our 500 volunteers that are at a leadership capacity within the organization as well. So anywhere that there's a gap, we are here as a nonprofit organization to partner with others to be able to bridge or build a bridge over that gap and make an impact in others' lives. And we owe all this special thanks to our strategic partners, AWS, Bloomberg, Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, Cisco, Facebook, Google, Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, Optum, AbbVie, JP Morgan, Chase & Company, Navy Federal Credit Union, Nike, SentinelOne, Wayfair, Workday, Accenture, American Airlines, Arctic Wolf, Dell Technologies, Investnet, Flatiron, Fortinet, Haystack Solutions, Here Technologies, the Home Depot, who is bringing you this fabulous webinar here today, IBM, MITRE, Oak Ridge National Lab, Palo Alto Networks, Salesforce, SANS Institute, SAP, SmoothStack, SpearTip, Starbucks, Target, University of California, San Diego, and Verizon. And so before I hand it over to Karen, I'd like to encourage you to ask a lot of questions. At the bottom of your screen, there's a chat functionality there for you to just upload your questions, and Karen will answer those at the end of her presentation here today. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our newsletters. That is the latest and greatest way to stay up to date with all things of the Wheesus organization. We roll out those skill development training programs, those speaking opportunities, those media opportunities. We're always pushing those out. Just, it seems like on the daily, even more so now than ever. So to never miss a beat in all things that Wheesus has going on and is offering, please subscribe to that newsletter. And also, we're all over social media. We have a Facebook page, Facebook group. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So please join us, and so that together we can continue to grow. So, I was hoping that I was sharing my screen, but it looks like
I think it might have been me that did that. Apologies.
okay.
It was there. So
Okay. Oh, there you go, Karen. So yeah, we're just
now,
all messing around with the little back end here. So this is perfect. It's all great. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand the stage over to Karen and let Karen take it away from here. So thank you so much, Karen.
all right. Thank you, Lynn. And I'm really honored to be here. I know it's a fantastic group of women, and I hope that I can bring something to it and get the ideas going. And just as an introduction, so I'm the principal engineer at Home Depot. I've been with Home Depot for about a year. I'm a principal engineer in PKI and cryptography, but I've also have worked a lot in the identity space and cybersecurity in general. I've been with Advanced Cyber Defense at RSA. I was with RSA for years. So I've been in doing cybersecurity for about 20 years. I started with the phone company and was one of their founding members of their cybersecurity team. So seen a lot. I've can talk about most of it now and had a lot of fun. And I'm really happy to see more women in this field. And it's amazing. We obviously didn't just appear. We've been here all along, is one of the things I have discovered. So happy to be here. So in my talk today, I wanted to talk about zero trust because we all just lived through COVID. As a case in point, I'm a remote hire for Home Depot. I've actually never met most of my coworkers. So this is something I was talking about zero trust and identity 2 years ago at RSA. And this is something even more near and dear to my heart now because I am one of the remote workforce. And I've gotten to see the pros and cons of that. So to go ahead and dive in, and this is where I definitely encourage everybody, if you want to interrupt and have me go a different direction, if you've got something else you want to see, I really prefer a more robust interactive platform rather than death by PowerPoint. So there we go. But just to start, I want to go through a little bit of history. When I started, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it was all about perimeters. So if you look at traditional security and what we've been doing, it's all based around the perimeter, the moat. We talk about insider threat, external, attack surfaces. And while we're getting used to that being machines and clients and servers, there's still the idea of the perimeter. And that doesn't mean, and I want to make sure that folks understand, I'm not saying that perimeters are completely going away. They're changing, and where they fit and how they look, all of that is changing. But if we look before, look at the early days, we had mainframes, we connected in dumb terminals to mainframes. Then we had client server. As we went forward into e-commerce, it was all client server. We had now we have an internet, so now we need to protect ourselves. So we're going to have firewalls and we're going to have a demilitarized zone, a DMZ. Then we'll talk back to our intranet. And so if you look at it, you had perimeters, and then what we were doing is zones, where you would put zones inside the perimeters or perimeters within perimeters. And we controlled that, first by segments, by VLANs, by application security firewalls, network security firewalls. We all know the way that's gone. But the issue with that approach is that it depended on limited egress ingress points. Okay, cool. Well, I got to watch the traffic. Where should I watch? I can only watch so much. We assumed a lot of times there assumes security within the perimeter. I've actually worked breaches where I had a network engineer tell me, it's okay, we use Telnet. It's only on the intranet. But obviously I was there for a breach. It wasn't so okay. We have static perimeters. So that's the other thing of once you set these up, they stay that way. It's like digging a moat, which provides for a static attack surface. Means I can guess where you're going. I can go ahead and run and look around at what you have, so it makes it actually easier across time to figure out the attack surface and how we want to aim the attack if you're the attacker. It gets more difficult to interrupt the attack lifecycle because, again, everything's static. If someone has figured out how to take advantage of it, it's much harder to change on the fly without causing outages. So it also and then if you look on it, it relies a lot on detection and response. So because I have a moat, because I have these security systems, I'm going to see, I need a burglar alarm. Are you in my house and you're not supposed to be? So that's kind of and I know I'm kind of oversimplifying it and for time, but that's basically how it has been working is we put a line in the sand and then we watch that line. We watch the door, we watch the windows, but it stays pretty static. So as we go forward, we can see that that's changing. We have the clouds now. Everybody, I won't go into, too much detail, but just as stuff, we've got infrastructure as a cloud with Google and others. We've got AWS, everything else. We've got platform as a service where I'm not running my own systems anymore on your shared infrastructure. I'm going to just worry about running my application here or this, as we look at containers and how that's working. We're looking, Kubernetes, you're looking at Docker, we've got our sidecar, we're doing everything via our sidecars. That's making it easier to roll things out, much faster, much more automated, and but it all takes advantage of this cloud. We've got software as a service. Of course, that means we run everything. If you look at my slide here, I stole a picture from Red Hat where it shows the difference. On-site, you do everything. Infrastructure as a platform, well, I don't have to run the hardware and such. It's someone else's problem. And a lot of times that infrastructure is going to give me additional services like security. Then I've got my platform, which is, okay, now I just got to do the data and applications. And finally, the software as a service where they're holding the data, but it's my data, but now they're in charge. And that's going to bring its own issues, as I'm sure some of you are aware. But that's where, if we look at this, what are the big differences that cloud has really brought us? One is these containers. We're really living in a zero trust world where things are getting much easier to roll out. We're depending on automation. There's the speed of this automation. Well, then also with this, if you look at it, it's changing my perimeters in some ways because on my containers, I'm rolling out new containers all the time, whether they last for 48 hours, whether they last for a week. That's up to the organization. But now if I'm actually refreshing on a much more consistent basis, much more automated basis. So in that way, if you look at it, that's affecting my attack surface because you might be into one container, but as soon as I blow it away and bring it up, all of a sudden you're out. So that's also changing the way attackers are looking at the surface and what they need to do. Because serverless, obviously containers is pulled to the serverless computing because now it's a platform. And if I'm the hacker, I'm now looking at how to take advantage of that platform rather than trying to figure out how to get on your system. How do I get to that IP? How do I escalate? It's not quite the same. Of course, cloud security. These are the things, key management services, CA as a service, the authentication services, all these nice little add-ons that the infrastructure as a service and platform as a service are adding. This brings the bar up. It doesn't necessarily change it for the big companies with the enterprise. But if you think about that medium company who couldn't afford to really do a key management process or really have their own PKI, it allows them to get security services with a lower cost of entry. So I wanted to pull that out. And finally, edge computing. As we have gone remote and we're seeing this really get exacerbated, and I'll talk about that in a bit, we're at the edge computing. Now we're in the cloud. So how do I bring the cloud closer to my users? How do I bring the cloud closer to me if I have on-premise? So that's the big thing, is edge. And then you can see I put zero trust here because we were talking about a world where you can't trust anything. Perimeters aren't there. I can't just assume trust anymore. And that naturally fits, because if you look at the cloud, you've got now a lot more ingress egress points. I've got to talk, my on-prem has to talk to the cloud. My cloud's talking to everybody else. And I'm going to talk in a bit about what COVID did for that, because it was already happening. People were moving to the cloud. We were already dealing with the Swiss cheese of our perimeters as we move to the cloud. We're already dealing with users that don't need to VPN to get to applications. How do we control them? All of those issues were here. But then when COVID came along, everything went faster. So if we really look at COVID's impact, we sent, as things started happening in February and then into March and people started getting sent home, all of a sudden it really taxed our VPNs. At this point too, but if you look at this, a lot of companies had already started to do things like they changed their email to Outlook 365 is a very common one. And as they did that, all of a sudden you've got users that don't need to VPN to get to their systems. So that, I think, helped to make COVID not as painful as it could have been, because that process had already started. So what needed to happen now is, okay, what do we need to do to make it so we have enough VPN for our users to come in? How do we make it that users go more to the cloud? Can we expedite our move to the cloud so that we can get users off of our VPN? All of these are things we started to see. So you start seeing this expedited migration, the initial expansion of VPN, but limited, because as I said, this is actually something that cloud made it where we don't need VPN as enough. And I'm going to come back to that because I know that I've seen some fun things around that, around the assumptions of how machines get managed, how users get managed. Because as this remote workforce went out to their home, this also made us care more about edge. So how can we work with, SaaS providers that take advantage of edge computing? How can we use co-location of our providers to provide better services for our infrastructure in the cloud? How do we use this to tie together our brick and mortar? In my case of Home Depot, we've got our own data centers and stores. Other retailers are going to have stores and other brick and mortars. A lot of people have their own data centers. So how to tie this together really makes a difference. But then that's where we come into the management of end user devices. If you look at a lot of companies, you assumed that the user would be logging on a regular basis, that the machines would be on the network on a regular basis. And I think what a lot of us saw was that didn't happen. So if your email and a lot of your normal day-to-day systems are in the cloud through Office 365, what reason does a user have to VPN in to join your network? If you think about it, normally VPN will make the connectivity slower. So now I'm going to go to my cloud apps while VPNing and taking all of those performance hits. Some users use internet phones, which break if you VPN in. So there were a number of reasons why users started looking at it and going, but wait, I don't need to be on my network to get what I need to have. And if you look at the implication on it, because now you don't have machines on networks checking in with AD every day. You don't have users logging on directly to AD every day. You don't have things on the network so it can get patched every day. You can't do certificate renewals as easily because you're not on the intranet. So I know that, and we had some issues with watching how this impacted things, and then having to look at how do we adjust for the fact that people aren't on our networks? How do we control this? So if you look at that, that actually pushed how in devices get done and how they get managed. This was definitely a boon for MDM. If you didn't have MDM, chances are you started looking at it. If you did have MDM, chances are you started looking at how to make it better. As everybody went cloud or bust. And that was happening before, but it just went a lot faster. You can see, put a little COVID thing on that little cloud or bust wagon, which I know it's chintzy, but there you go, a little bit of comedy. So that's where you look at the expedited adoption in order to deal with these new home-based users. How do we manage their machines? How do we get to them? How do we give them what they need? And how do we make sure that they're not getting into trouble? So at the same point, I think we all saw before COVID, as nation states and other attacker groups started aiming at home-based users as a way to get to the machines without having to come through a perimeter. So right then and there, Zero Trust comes home, but now we just sent all of our workforce home. And that's where it became a real issue. So that's where, as you're looking at one, it was a good thing because any company that was already going into the cloud, any decision was now validated. Look, we're in better shape because we went to the cloud. We're able to deal with this. In fact, we need to do it more. So, and that's where you see Zero Trust exploding, because now automation makes a difference. And now I have to figure out, oh, how do I manage a device that I can't directly touch all the time? How do I reach across the internet? And that's where, if you think about the impact on perimeters, you end up with a more dynamic perimeter. Now, rather than dealing with the, okay, my machine is, I'm going to get behind the perimeter. Now you can let me here. I can talk to my servers because I'm inside the castle walls. But now I have to make everything talk outside the castle walls. So at this point, I really have to concern, okay, how secure is my device? How secure is my user? Can I allow them to attach to me? What's the difference between allowing them to attach to an application in the cloud and an application in inside my company? What does that mean? So that's where, as you look for that, what's happening is now you're going to focus on the client, what someone is actually on, whether it be their phone, their laptop, and how secure is that? And then, okay, now I'm going to be going to a server, whether it be in the cloud, whether I VPN in and then go to that server. I don't know how much I can trust my clients, so I have to validate the trust of the client and of the user. And now I can build a perimeter, a session between those two. So if you think about it, the old SSL session, as just a case in point, now becomes its own kind of perimeter that's going to exist for that. As you look at these new perimeters, you can start to say, well, is that enough? How long should I let it happen? If I'm letting my user VPN in, that's a temporary perimeter between the VPN point and the endpoint. But should I trust it all day, or should I expire it? So that is, some of the things that we're looking at. Just reading up some of the questions as I catch up on that. Okay. So the top two attack surfaces, that's where it depends whether you're talking about vendor or something like that. But as I said, when I talk about attack surfaces, that's something where I look at the classic attack surface and you can see the script kiddies and everybody running, looking for any sort of opening. This is the classic nation state attack where they would send in script kiddies and they're just running a complete attack against your external perimeter. This is your DMZ, your firewalls, just looking for what's open. And then once they've determined what's open, they can figure out how they're going to go after it at that point. Is there a web service that was open to cross-site scripting? Is there a database that was left open here? What is my next move? Because if you think about the attack cycle, it's figuring out, okay, if I'm looking at it from a perimeter, there's my home-based users, then there's your corporate need. And if I want to attack against that, where can I find my opening? And then what opening do I take advantage of? Because of course, it's always easier to get at the end user device. And once I'm on that, can I use that now to escalate into your, say for a VPN, can I use that to escalate into your environment? And then once I'm there, can I find a good foothold where I could get to a server and start to move laterally and start to move up? With every nation state, I work mostly nation state breaches, and everyone, it was, a race to see how fast you could compromise Active Directory or whatever the centralized user directory was. Always the first thing, because they're looking to escalate and get as much privilege. And where are you going to find all the users with the privilege? In the user directory. And then it's a matter of figuring out the groups. So I'm not sure I answered your question there, but that's kind of how I see it, as they would focus. Of course, when you're looking at varieties, of course, Windows is still out there and they would look for that. But, I'm not going to get into a Windows versus Mac security or any of that, because the security is good as, how up to date you're staying with the hacker. So obviously, any resources have to be put towards what the attackers are mostly focusing on. And the attackers are focusing on whatever's the most population and is going to be the easiest hit. So as we go into, talking about zero trust and go forward, I just wanted to show, this is something I'm showing all the clouds. This is, I think, a lot of companies, you're starting to work with Edge to figure out how to bring the cloud closer. You've got offices or stores or something else. You've got your data centers. And now you've got a variety of SaaS clouds. Most likely, if you're a larger organization, you're on at least 2 or more clouds to try and be more cloud agnostic, which of course drives the containerization also. So just in looking at that, catching up with questions, going to take a breather here as we go forward. Looking for that. And as I said, I'm not trying to say that anything here didn't happen before, but it just started going faster. And here we go. Is Home Depot on the path to near field communication technology and such? And I would say, looking at everything, this is something we're dealing with. We've got network stuff, of course. I'm about to head to DEF CON this week, so I'll be well aware of my attack surfaces as I walk around, because I've got my Wi-Fi, I've got my Bluetooth, I've got my wireless anyway, as someone puts up, something to capture my signal. We've got near field communication, and we are looking at how to do all that. I think a lot of companies are, but of course the limitation is what different vendors we work with for different equipment will support. And that's the part that I'd say has lagged with COVID. Is it's one thing to have cloud and to be able to put up new software techniques, but having hardware that will support the new stuff, that's going to take longer. And I think we're just starting to really see some of that because of the manufacturing chain. So that's where I'm dependent on what the vendors will allow in my hardware too. But we are looking at all of it and how to stack that and how it affects the attack surface too. Sorry, I don't have any more concrete answers there, but I think that's, I'm perfectly happy to talk about it, because I'm pretty sure we're all in the same boat in looking at how do we deal with these things. Okay, so hopefully I'm catching up with some of that. If I don't answer your questions, feel free to come back around if I didn't answer it perfectly, if you have another state. I will be honest, I'm getting used to this format also, um, of getting all the questions and presenting all at the same time. So I have to say, I'm not going to be perfect, and I do very much appreciate your patience. Okay, so I've been talking about zero trust, but we didn't really define it. So this is one I don't want to just give death by PowerPoint, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So with zero trust, said the main concept is there is no such thing as intrinsic trust. We don't know exactly where our user is. We don't know exactly what the device. So this is where establishing control and having chains of control actually start to make a real difference. So there is no by default, I'm not going to trust. It has to be earned. Now, how do I establish this trust? How do I earn that trust? Well, first thing, as I mentioned, is assuring control of the device, platform, and the applications. So this is where knowing that I've got a secure platform in a Windows device and a Mac device in my phone. How do I tie that to a security chip? How do I know that it's not just rife with all sorts of problems? And it goes from the very simple defense in depth stuff about, okay, having not antivirus, but having endpoint protection, whether it be antivirus, whether it be tying into systems looking for 0 days. There's a variety of doing it, and that part is also still evolving, where we went from antivirus with signatures, and now we're looking for heuristics, and you've got endpoint protection that ties in with other monitoring and SIMs and alerting and all of that. So all of that is still critical, but then also looking at the actual hardware of secure boot. Is there a place where someone could put a middle layer that's going to defeat all of my identity and all my other checking? So making sure we're using secure boot, making sure the manufacturer is using secure boot, making sure that, taking advantage of tying things to the TPM. And I know that's certainly a work in progress and evolving too. So, but doing all that, because if you look at it, I heard us saying IAM is the new firewall, because where trust comes from is, can I trust that identity? So first of all, can I trust the machine? And then verifying the machine identity, and that machine is under your organization's control, or at least under the user's control. And if you think about it, this is where MDM is going to really come in, because you don't really know if it's under your control unless you had a way to vet it. So this makes the BYOD and bringing it under MDM that much more important. And if you have corporate-owned devices, it also allows you to check that your corporate-owned device has not been compromised. So as you go through, you're verifying that authenticity of the identity, making sure that there's not a platform where someone could have taken control. And then once you've done that identity and checked it and set up that perimeter, that temporary perimeter, I think of it almost like blowing bubbles. And how long is that bubble going to last? The difference being, as we go through, you can define how long that bubble lasts according to looking at risk. So this is the point when you're looking at all of this. How much do I trust this user? Where did they come from? And you're setting up a risk scenario that you'll be able to determine how much access you're willing to give. How much are you willing to let them do based on how much you trust them, and everything that goes in: machine identity, user identity, all of the alerting checks. Defense in depth still applies. It's just defense in depth is now a client server thing, not just a network thing. So, and that's where it comes to that next step, is protecting the data in transit. How do I encrypt between there, and so that nobody else can come in and break into my session on that? And then once you're there, of course, inspecting and logging to looking for anything nefarious. And that's a key point I want to bring back with zero trust. As we automate, as we containerize, the how things should look is getting more and more set. And that will help logging, because the less variation I have in how my images are supposed to look and how my users are supposed to act, the more I'll be able to identify anomalies. And I realize that's a work in progress too. So as you look at this, we go, as I said, we're talking about these zero trust perimeters, which are established when trust is earned. And the factors of them, they're dynamic. They're not meant to last. It's not a moat anymore, but that allows me to determine how strong is my perimeter, how much effort do I want to put into protecting it, and how long do I want it to last. So I can also start to get some scale and actually build in some cost into here, where I had a much more monolithic design before. It's authenticated. It's ephemeral. It's not going to last. So down to the dynamic, it's micro-segmented. I'm not actually putting a bunch of users or a bunch of machines in one. It's a machine to machine, so it micro-segments, which helps to, it makes the attack surface harder. It segments the attack surface in a way that's going to, rather than me going after all of the endpoints, what we've seen is you're going to aim directly at the cloud. I'm going to start looking for weaknesses on your server side again, because that endpoint, what do I get if I hack one of your users? If they're not even bothering to VPN, great. I get some user's email. If I got the right user, maybe this will help, but that's a lot harder. So that also, I mean, I'm talking about risk-based as we're looking at it. What activity are they trying to do? I mean, let's face it. We're looking at what we're bringing in, what the client is, but not only is what kind of client are they coming to, what user are they, but what are they trying to do? It's majorly different if I'm trying to configure my routers or troubleshoot something on a core router than if I'm just checking my daily email. And as I said, this is stuff we've all seen. It's just expanding a lot. And role-based, I've kind of touched on that, but that's what we're looking at. Do I let this type of role in to my cloud? Do I let them into my SaaS? Do I let them into my actual network? Because I think now you can actually see admittance into your network at all becomes a more privileged thing. And I think one of the things you're seeing here is unprivileged users are being moved to the cloud, whereas privileged and administrator users are the ones that are now using the networks more. So you see the shifting landscape like that also. So that's just kind of an overview on zero trust to bring it back in. And I know I've been kind of talking about the different pieces, and I might have been going over the same thing a few times, a little redundant. And apologies if you've known this stuff and that's boring, but I also want to make sure that anybody that's not as familiar has a chance to come up to speed too. So there's a method to my madness on that, and hopefully it doesn't slow you guys up too far. Okay, so we've talked about zero trust and all of that, and I wanted to give an example. So this is an example. This is actually an example from Intrust on the layering of identity onto a phone, a smartphone. So as you can see, the first thing you have to care about is device reputation. How secure is my device? Does it have the right chips in place? Did the vendor actually bother to instantiate secure boot correctly? Have they made any fixes? What version of Android are they using? Did they do any customizations to Android to take care of any security issues? All of those things should be of concern to any enterprise, especially in a BYOD. There's always going to have to be, kind of a, here's your authorized device, because you need to trust those devices. And from there, I can start to bring up my operating system. I can build the applications on top of it. I've got my key stores going. And from there, I can build the identity and now actually be able to have assurance that the user that says they're coming from there, the device identity, all of that's correct. And now my user comes in on this secure device and they do their identity also. At this point, you're looking at, am I using mobile smart credentials? Did I just need, am I still using username and passphrase? Do I need to step up my authentication? What adaptive authentication might I have in place if I have any of that? So that's where you're looking at this step-up authentication based on the risk. And all of this is prior to completing the session handoff or actually allowing that perimeter, that zero trust perimeter to get created. I just wanted to add this because I always like this platform because I think it shows it pretty well. Okay. Just picking up with some things here. All right. At this point, just taking a little break. If there's any other questions, please put them out here on that. I think, here we go. Here's a couple. On the slides, I believe this is going to be recorded. And then, all right. Cool. I think that's all there. So then we step forward. Now, this is the part where I hear a lot of stuff going back and forward, and I am not a big fan of any silver bullet technology. As soon as you promise me that you've got, the magic beans, I'm turning off, quite frankly, because it's defense in depth still applies. It's just where it applies and how it applies. So the first thing I would say to anybody is, this doesn't change everything. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're still going to need secure zones. There's still going to be network perimeters, but you're just seeing it become much more focused on that. And even so, you've got containers. So what is a perimeter is kind of changing because now it's like, oh, it's not necessarily an IP address. It's something else. How does this look? So it's just adapting with the landscape is part of what's needed. But I think you'll find that even though things are shifting from one layer of network over to another layer, doesn't mean some of the methodologies won't apply. So I always encourage everybody to look at the old and look at the framework of the old and see how it might apply to the new, especially if you put some new technology in there. That's just a trick I learned with cryptography. Turns out triple DES, the framework of triple DES is excellent. You just need better algorithms and better strength. So that's just an example, really nerdy example, but just an example of, look at the old, take from what you can. We've got the segmented. We're going to need secure zones. And if anything, our secure zones can become more secure because the more and more we limit traffic from end users into what we call a secure zone, the more secure that zone will actually be. So as I said, moving the end user out to the cloud is actually much more secure if you really look at it, because now you're able to focus on what if someone's been able to escalate the attack and they're at my server? What are my, how are my servers supposed to talk with each other? What should that look like? What should that traffic look like? And there's a lot. And when you take the users out of the equation, it's much more easy to predict traffic. So that's why I say you still got segmented secure zones. You're still modular design, very much needed. That's one of the things with cloud. We're going to go even more modular, and you still got 3-tier. Still not a good idea to put your database right with your web server. Not a good idea to put all of your credentials or your key, your encryption keys right next to the data that they're encrypting. Separation still applies. Logic still applies here. So there's no need for the extreme tiered approach that we saw in my first slide where you had like 7 zones, but there still is a need for some tiering. So just wanted to bring that out. And of course, compliance requirements. It's very important to consider that as you're going, compliance is not going to change as quickly as cloud and adoption and all of that. So one thing you might want to think about as you're going forward is how will, as I change this, how does this in fact affect my compliance? If you got PCI DSS, how do I defend this to my auditors to show that I still have the right controls and I'm actually improving things? If you have audit beyond PCI DSS, other types of PCI, that'll move even slower and you'll have to defend it even more. Fortunately, some of the other requirements around like Gramm-Leach-Bliley are a little less intrinsic. Same thing with DSS. They provide a lot of room. But if you happen to be on here and you've got SCADA requirements, that's going to move even slower. And of course, if we're talking SCADA, that is a secure zone. A lot of this cloud stuff isn't going to apply because I'm really hoping we keep SCADA and cloud separate in many ways, at least for now, until we're ready for more. And anybody that disagrees with anything I say, please let me know. I love a good conversation. So just want to bring that up. The compliance, you kind of need to think about that. And of course, just because you moved it into the cloud doesn't mean pen testing and all of those things go away. If anything, your third-party assessments become much more important. Why? Just because I put cloud on my name and I say I'm doing a SaaS doesn't mean you should trust me. Make sure that your SaaS providers that they have to defend, that they're getting penetration tests and all those other moves. Make sure that they're doing everything correctly and ask a lot of questions so that you can make sure that you're not actually just trading your security problems for somebody else's. So with that, we're getting towards the end and I've got that, so this is where I've talked about it. You can see some of the gaps, what's next. Obviously, when you're dealing with cloud, you don't have the same access to the infrastructure. So as I said, that's the part where you've got to trust. What are you doing? But then what can you monitor as you look at platforms, as you look at that? So if I'm not in control of my systems, how do I do monitoring? And the answer there is you need to work with your vendors to make sure that as you're connecting to APIs, that your APIs have some monitoring hooks. Because what's happening with this is my monitoring's going from the network layer up to the application layer. And I need to be able to monitor within the containers, within the application. And to do that, it means that your developers, that your vendors' developers need to be programming in these hooks. And that your cloud providers are providing hooks for you to tie things in with your systems also, so that you can tie in with your SIEM. You can tie in with, whether it's outsourced or not. It just lets you hook everything together. Finally, full remote, full endpoint management. You can't deny on network connectivity for endpoint management. You need a better way. Access management of cloud applications. As you're looking at how do I tie my access management together, how do I tie this together? Where do I tie my credentials? How do I manage my credentials? Because obviously you can't have one set of credentials that is the GCP way, one that's the AWS way, and then what's on-prem. You need to find a way to tie this all together. So if you think about it, single sign-on is still very much an issue, but how you tie it together in the back end becomes a bigger issue. We can't just throw a single sign-on shim anymore and expect things to move between the clouds. You've got to think about that. And that's where, in doing that, so I would also say looking at using device security more, layering device security and user access, and where you can, not using the same type of credentials or the same methodologies. Use for defense in depth, I would recommend looking at identity defense in depth, layering what users do best versus what systems do best. Users are great at seeing the forest for the trees, but they can't tell anything wrong on the bark of the tree itself, per se, whereas systems are very good at seeing the details, but not so good about seeing the trends. And you can layer those behaviors in a way to get the strongest systems. So that's where, and then that's the other is tying all these together. is the big challenge. So I've been trying to watch for, questions as we've gone, but I'd like to open it up. If there's anything else, any discussions or direction you want to talk about, um, to see what you guys are seeing. If you've got anything that you want to talk about in a particular use case you want to talk about, I'm happy to go through that. But other than that, I definitely do appreciate your patience. Not quite used to the this completely online format as much. So if I have not answered something or have drowned something or beat it till it's dead in the middle, my apologies. But looking at that, are there any other things that anybody wants to discuss? Use cases, things like that? All right, just coming up to here. Okay, I see here, because of the SolarWinds debacle, have we changed how we evaluate monitoring tools? I can't talk any details, of course, but I think it's all of us. This goes back to that vendor, which is, and I just so people know here, I'll throw in some more. I worked for RSA as part of my history. I was with RSA for almost 9 years, and I was there during the breach. So when I talk about working breaches, I've gotten to work breaches from the vendor side and from the customer side. Mine were all nation state. So with that, I would say that's where you can't just trust a security vendor because they say secure. And I've worked for the security vendor. I can assure you, while they have different liabilities that they need to be concerned with, and they do that correctly, never think a security vendor doesn't sweep dirt under the rug the way as the rest of us do. So that's where, especially if you have a vendor that's rushed something out to market to try and meet something, you've really got to be careful about kicking the tires and asking the questions. And I can understand that vendors don't want to tell you the secret sauce, but that's also where your vendor will be willing to get a third party involved to do an audit when they want to tell you that they're secure and help prove it. And then the other thing I say with vendors, look to see if each vendor has people involved with standards committees and other security organizations. Because how are they learning new things and what they need to look for? That means they actually have to invest in looking for it. So those are some things I don't have any easy answer on how to avoid the next SolarWinds, other than, zero trust. Don't trust them just because they tell you should trust them. And okay, looking there. So PCI compliance. I say now, let me go in order right here. Operational technology IoT landscape. For the managing devices and stuff, that's where I said for BYOD, you're going to need something like MDM. For IoT, enterprise IoT, I'm going to go back to basics. If you have not talked to your procurement team about IoT and what devices are being allowed into your organization, it's time to start that discussion, because you've got a lot of these IoT devices coming in with self-signed certs. You've got vendors that might not even have a methodology to replace these self-signed certs. And these are examples of, you need to look at what is that vendor doing to help the security landscape too. Are they looking towards it? Are they making any investment? And the only way to get ahead of that is to work with your procurement team to start saying, hey, stop letting everything in the door. Let security have a say in what comes in the door, especially for all these smart devices. On that. So let me look. I'm just pulling this up. Thank you. And thank you for any compliments, of course. On the PCI compliance, SOX compliance, I haven't seen as much, but I'm not as up to speed on some of the more recent SOX. SOX normally stays pretty generic. So one thing I would also say, and this is true of PCI DSS, if you are actually staying afoot and trying to do what's best and doing industry best practice, most likely you are going to be compliant or near compliance with only minor findings. It's when you let the technical debt stack up, you let an old algorithm stay out there, you let the 1024, you let the longer and longer you let older stuff stay out there, the harder it is to fix and the more technical debt you have. And it's just, as I said, that's where I see the real problems coming from. If it's, oh, I'm afraid it's going to go to this, but I'm only here, you're going to be okay. I mean, you're looking to the forward. It's when you still have things like if you've got 1024 and you're still sending out signed 1024, yeah, that's where you need to be focusing, because that's going to be a big problem. And you're going to be spending all your time on that technical debt rather than looking to the future. So that's where I say if you're just trying to do the right thing, that really does go a long way. And I mean, if you need me to tell that to your management, I mean, I think that's all of us has that as a problem, is trying to get management to care before the auditors tell you you have to. But it does leave you in such a better position when you do. How do you hold vendors reliable for data breach related to the service product provided? That's up to your lawyers, and that is the liability sections of your master service agreements, of your product agreements. And ultimately, there is some risk there, but that's where, when you're talking to your third parties, asking them what kind of cyber insurance they have is definitely a question. And every security vendor out there should have cyber insurance. And I guarantee you that the companies providing said cyber insurance will make them go through a checklist that will help you as a customer be assured that they're doing the right thing, because those cyber insurance companies don't want to lose money either. So it really comes down to, it's like everything else, how much money is on the line if it goes wrong. And then at that point too, looking at, understand everybody's going to get hacked. You can't just hang someone because they got hacked. You have to look at how they got hacked, what was done, what did they do to try and prevent it, and most importantly, what is their reaction to the hack, and working with their customers who are impacted. At the end of the day, there is no perfection. You can only go for transparency and, who's in the trench with you, who's willing to be in the trench with you. That, basic business doesn't change there. Okay, we're right up on the hour. So I really want to thank folks for listening to me. It's been quite a while since I've been able to be out there presenting, so I was a little bit rusty. I hope it didn't show too much, but I really appreciate the time, the questions, and everything else. And I will say, as a last plug, if anybody is at DEF CON or going to be there in person, please feel free to shoot me a note. And I can be reached at, it's my name, Karen_Reinhardt at homedepot.com. So if you're going to be at DEF CON or such, or you have a spare question, feel free to reach out to me directly. If you're there, I'd love to meet up and say hi to some faces. I've missed being able to meet people, quite frankly. All right. And that is everything. And thank you for your time. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.